So three Ukrainian male models have been arrested for arson attacks on Keir Starmer's property. And they all had accounts on Grindr, interestingly enough, apparently, which have all been deleted. And there are obviously some questions about Keir Starmer's private life and his relationship with Lord Ali, who's openly homosexual.
Breaking right now, shock new claims over the mainstream media cover-up of the Ukrainian adjacent firebombers of Keir Starmer's property. Now, you'll know that these are three young men, aspiring models. There's been some question on that front about their past and exactly what they were doing in the United Kingdom, how they had this connection to Starmer. But what has been most shocking to me is to see the mainstream media yet again just decide, this isn't a story. Nothing to see here, folks. Let's hide behind the contempt of court laws and just say nothing. And then, as very shrewd observers of this story have pointed out, what they'll end up doing is be pressured into pleading guilty, and then we'll never find out what was really going on here. Well, one person who isn't prepared to play by those rules is the former Conservative MP, Andrew Bridgen, who, as Cat A pointed out, dropped a bombshell about the three rent boys connected to Starmer. A former Ukrainian Secret Service agent says the boys were gathering information from UK politicians and passing it on to the Ukrainian dissident Portnov, a challenger to Zelensky, who was assassinated in Madrid 4 days after their arrest. The plan is to replace Zelensky and continue the war. We'll get analysis on this that you certainly won't receive in the mainstream media from our superstar panel, June Slater and Howard Cox, in just one moment. But first, watch Andrew Bridgen's bombshells. He's speaking here to the New Zealand dissident journalist, someone who, like me, was in the mainstream media but has now gone independent, Liz Gunn.
There's also the situation with Starmer has been very interesting, and it's not just what the media are saying, but what they're not saying. So three Ukrainian male models have been arrested for arson attacks on Keir Starmer's property. And they all had accounts on Grindr, interestingly enough, apparently, which have all been deleted. And there are obviously some questions about Keir Starmer's private life and his relationship with Lord Ali, who's openly homosexual. But what the media aren't hearing, and I saw a report on this, it was actually from Vasily Poroshkov, the whistleblower to me about the child trafficking from Ukraine, the former Ukrainian Secret Service agent. Yes. And he claims that the three Ukrainian rent boys were gathering information from senior politicians in the UK, and they were passing them to the Ukrainian dissident in Madrid, who was mysteriously assassinated 4 days after their arrest.
Oh, this is
and he would have seen himself as a potential challenger at the next presidential elections in Ukraine. And what I'm hearing is that they're clearing the decks, and that the preferred candidate, when Zelensky has, I think, shot his bolt, but the preferred candidate for the globalists is the gentleman who's now serving, he's former head of the Ukrainian armed forces, and he's now serving as the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, and that he'll be the next president, and the war will continue.
Now, Howard Cox, the thing here is that, okay, there are contempt of court laws, so we have to be honest with our audience that there are certain things in regards to the crime itself that if we were to talk about, we could be found in contempt of court. We could suffer like Tommy Robinson and end up behind bars. And I think it's important that we point that out to the start. But that is in terms of the crime itself. Now, we've seen, for example, some of the mainstream media try to link these three men to Russia. So why on earth is there not a proper examination going on as to whether they did have any connections to this Ukrainian dissident Portnov who was assassinated? And also, by the way, Howard Cox, and I don't know the answer to this, but if Andrew Bridgen is correct and they were on this gay sex app Grindr and they are or were rent boys, I don't see how at all their background in that regard would be in contempt of court, specifically to the crime in regards to firebombing. So I would argue that the mainstream media are doing what they often do, which is they're just choosing not to cover a story.
Well, Dan, thank you for warning me for a bit, because I'm privy to some information about this, and I'm not going to say it here now. But Andrew Bridgen is almost got it spot on. Obviously, these three aren't men, are they? So when we look at this situation, what's happening is it's being covered up again. Something's being covered up. Suddenly we got a Russian influence. Then it's the Grindr, the rent boy story, and all those sorts of things. When you put this all together, it just stinks again. And for some reason, Starmer still keeps coming up smelling of roses, less and less of a fragrance day by day. But the man seems to be bulletproof in terms of the mainstream media. They should be asking direct questions. Who are these people? Did you know them? Etc. And he should be issuing a statement, and hopefully, the various legal people that advise him, will tell him how to answer those questions. But we're not getting the truth again, Dan.
No, of course we're not. I mean, June Slater, these three men, Roman Lavranchov, 21 years old, an aspiring model. Stanislav Kaporik, 26, a Ukrainian-born Romanian national, also an aspiring model. And Petro Pochnikov, 34, a fashion entrepreneur. I mean, not the types of people that you would usually expect to be connected to firebombing of the Prime Minister's house. But what I just find extraordinary, June, is that as far as I've seen, there's no mainstream media asking Starmer or pushing Number 10 on this story.
What's that last one called? Pochnikov? Is that like spatchcock chicken? Any complaints? Gitufsky Shitsky. In an effort to avoid prison food, I think that the least said about the actual firebombing is, or whatever they've done, arson, is the better route. But usually arsonists are in dirty parkas and living rough and really bitter and twisted about getting evicted from some squat. Arsonists aren't generally as well groomed as these men. Something stinks, doesn't it? Something, the smelly stuff is all around, but obviously the mainstream media aren't touching it. Is there a D notice out? I don't know. It just seems a bit odd to me, very odd indeed.
Well, of course,
and the way Andrew, he rings me sometimes as Andrew Bridgen, and I always think, what next? Because it's always something really quite like, you're joking. I think he's the individual I've said the words "you're joking" to more than anybody on the planet. And obviously, he's a grown up, isn't he? It's not like I'm getting this from some dodgy cartel.
No, he was completely. I mean, Andrew Bridgen, who was someone completely accepted by the establishment, by the way. As long as he was a Conservative MP, they were totally fine with him. As soon as he started speaking out about the COVID madness, he was immediately cancelled. So that's a really interesting one to me. And look, we'll keep on the story as much as we can, obviously just accepting the fact that because of these ridiculous, ludicrous contempt of court laws, there are limitations. However, what I would say is that these contempt of court laws are actually becoming dangerous to British society because we still don't know the full truth about Axel Rudikabana. Do you remember the media promised, we're going to tell you the truth about Axel Rudikabana and his family and how they got here and everything after he's been convicted? We do not want to risk the trial collapsing. Well, do we know the truth now, months and months after the conclusion of the trial? Of course we don't. However, what I do think we have seen this week is the end of Keir Starmer's premiership. And really interesting things are now going on in the mainstream media because they have now accepted, I think, that this guy, this chameleon, is a busted flush. And very soon, all of their efforts are going to be towards pushing Angela Rayner to become a true left-wing Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And of course, this also means that the scrutiny is going to increasingly come on Nigel Farage, who Keir Starmer admitted yesterday was now his number one rival to be Prime Minister. Now, Farage is loving it, as Farage does. He posted, "Why are you so obsessed with me, Keir Starmer?" And then added, "The Prime Minister is resorting to dirty tricks borrowed from the 2016 referendum campaign to attack me. This is Project Fear 2.0. Now, I have to say, Starmer's speech in the factory was utterly bizarre, completely bizarre. Trying to be a man who's, caring about the working classes, then almost like immediately trying to attack Farage. It just didn't work. The optics of this was so bad. Watch. But first, the reason you're watching this show is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to determine which facts are true. And for good reason, given the ongoing debates over free speech, the controversy surrounding Brexit, and how Trump and other anti-establishment politicians are portrayed. So I have the solution. It's called Ground News. It's the best way to stay informed and cut through media bias and manipulative narratives so you can get the facts for yourself. It's been a game changer for a news junkie like me, and you can see for yourself at ground.news/outspoken. So let me show you this incredible website and app in action. Let's take the recent landmark decision by the UK Supreme Court that ruled that women can only be biological adult human females, reversing years of trans extremism. You can see clearly in one place that over 360 sources around the world are covering this story. Ground News instantly shows how the story is being covered by the media, broken down by whether it leans left or right, illustrated by its biased distribution chart. And if you scroll down, you can actually see every headline about the story, along with the political bias and ownership of the publication. So quite clearly, you can see great coverage from the Daily Wire. They gave a really good headline: UK Supreme Court rules trans identifying men are not women. Loved what spiked online, and the Daily Telegraph did too. By stark contrast, however, the left-wing National in Scotland said the result was only a victory for gender-critical feminists, and the Canary ran with just a nutty headline: "Victory for the far right as Supreme Court rolls back trans women's rights by 2 decades." I mean, you couldn't make it up. My favourite feature is the blind spot feed, though, on Ground News, which surfaces upwards of 20 stories daily that receive the majority of coverage from one side of the political spectrum. So if you love the news, like I do and I know you do, the blind spot feed is the best way to get a balanced perspective on what's really happening. So go to ground.news/outspoken, or you can scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube and Rumble to subscribe today. You will get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for unlimited access. Big discount that. So that's ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
And only this morning, actually, you explained to me that the India deal in particular will be really important for glass and what you're doing directly, and of course for businesses like Whiskey who need glass all of the time. And that comes from my absolute determination to create jobs, good jobs, and to drive down the cost of living. And put more money in your pocket, which is, I think, the thing that most people are most concerned about. That's what drives me. But you can't say that about Nigel Farage.
So awkward. Nick Dixon was totally right on this. He posted, "This press conference is so weird. Starmer tries to segue from a friendly chat about glass making to a hit job on Farage." But June, it really does feel like even the mainstream media that have been in the tank for this Prime Minister for so long are now realising that the game is up.
Well, he's going down like a pint in the desert, isn't he? He couldn't go down any quicker. Nigel Farage did a montage of how many times he used his name in that press conference, 16 times. That's obsessive. That's not what you want to see from any leader who's so focused. What you should be doing, you're a leader of a country, you've got a product, your product is governance. You should be concentrating on what you can do for people. People would ignore Nigel Farage because what you're doing is so good, he'd go into the wilderness. Nigel comes to the forefront because what people are doing, they're going, well, hang on a minute, he's saying what I want to hear, not you. You're not saying anything I want to hear. He's not for the working man, the small business, the medium-sized business, the large business, the students, the pensioners, the military. I mean, the fisheries, people who voted for Brexit. He's just gone against the whole country. Someone said he doesn't read the room. I don't think he's even in the room. He's just the worst leader we've had in so long. There is an upshot to this. He's that bad. His own voter core base is turning against him because they message me on Facebook because they're not afraid, because I don't take the mickey out of them. They will come round and say, oh, June, actually, I voted for him and I wished I hadn't. He's losing it. He'll only have London, central London, and the lovies left, and civil servants. No one wants him.
Yeah, and remember, June, he's even obviously losing the Muslim vote because politics in this country is becoming increasingly sectarian. But look, I think today we're agreeing too much on everything so far today. So Howard and June, there's a split here, and I want to get into this split, okay? Because look at this from Inevitable West, who posted on X, breaking: Rupert Lowe is now polling higher for Prime Minister in the Red Wall amongst 18 to 24-year-olds than Deputy PM Angela Rayner and Tory leader Kemi Badenoch. This is nothing short of a revolution. More on this from World by Wolf, who wrote a Merlin strategy poll of 1,000 Red Wall voters shows 6% select Rupert Lowe as their preferred PM. Rupert has been in politics less than a year and doesn't even belong to a party at the moment. Robert Jenrick is on 8%, so watch out for a Jenrick-Lowe partnership coming soon. Basil the Great also said Farage takes lead over Starmer, but Rupert Lowe already on 6% despite not announcing his political intentions. This could get interesting. Okay, Howard, so you must be looking at this presumably thinking, wow, we've got a shot here with Rupert Lowe. Because remember, for a long time, everyone was just saying, oh, Rupert Lowe, he's the online right. No one knows about him outside of X. This polling is quite something, isn't it?
It's good to see. I mean, but it's the making of problems of reform itself. I'm not going to blame Nigel. I'm going to blame the reform headquarters over allowing this to happen. We've seen the CPS drop the charges against Rupert. I'm close to Rupert. He's a good friend. I've known him for a long time. And, as I said to you when I stood for London Mayor, and I was a guinea pig for reform. I had no help, no support whatsoever. And on the day I was elected, I wasn't elected. The day I actually went to place my vote in Westminster, no one turned up from Reform headquarters whatsoever. No one except Rupert Lowe, and he came and I, and Ben Habib has always been very close. And obviously, one of the things that really upset me was Nigel didn't declare himself as leader of the party when I was standing for mayor. He wasn't in sight. And he didn't even put anything out to say this guy. He wanted me to stand as London Mayor. In fact, he told Richard Tice, who invited me to stand as Mayor, it's the best idea he never had. And I was very chuffed by that because obviously it fitted in with Fairfield UK, the ULEZ expansion, all those sorts of things fitted well. But I've grown up a bit. I was naive about various things. I still think reform is the only option. I agree with Katie Hopkins. It's the monster we got to elect because frankly, the Tories are dead and buried. Who I've voted all my life. I'm a Thatcherite. I go back that far, and also Labour are just actually dying of death as through Starmer. And June is spot on about the way she described that. My point about Rupert is that I hope he's working his butt off. He's doing a great job of what he's doing, and I hope. Somehow in the long term things will come back together because the right is so split, it's unbelievable.
So June, what do you want to pick up on there? I guess can you acknowledge, June, what Howard's saying, which is that the way that Reform UK threw Rupert Lowe under the bus was really unwise?
No, because I don't see it as being thrown under a bus. I see a chain of events unfolding. And the first event I was aware of was Rupert going to a Tory journalist. Now, everybody's concentrating on the police thing with Zia and Rupert, which I think is awful. I don't know how the hell that ever happened. But nevertheless, the first thing that I saw was I looked at that story and I thought, oh, good grief, man, what have you done? You're doing well, you're popular, you're growing. Nobody knew you. I started retweeting you, as many others did. We loved what he was doing. I still love what he does on various things in Parliament. I think he's as much to blame for the split with reform as anyone. And obviously, I'll get a shed load of stick on your thread for saying this, but I'm not too concerned. What I'm bothered about is the practicalities of what's going on with the country currently. And I'm not saying this as a blind reform supporter or a blind Nigel Farage fan. I'm saying this as someone who's monitored politics because I want to save what I've built up for myself. I don't want it to be taken off me in taxes. And currently, the only vehicle that can get me out of this mess is the Reform Party, headed by Nigel Farage. Now, what's been going on? I did a poll. I did this on purpose, actually. I don't know if you can see it. I did one.
I'm blind, but I'm sure people can. But read it out to me, June.
Right. I did a poll specifically for Twitter because that's where the bulk of Rupert's support is. Not because people don't like him anywhere else, but because that's where he's known the best. So I thought, right, I'll do a poll. Would you come? Because I have no axe to grind with Rupert. I grind my axe strong and hard with the Tory party. Would you consider voting Tory if, blah, blah, blah? No, I'll vote Reform was one option. Yes, if Rupert Lowe joins them. And yes, I'll vote Tory anyway. No, I'll vote Reform was 81%. Yes, if Rupert Lowe joins them, 17%. And yes, I'll vote Tory anyway. Don't know who they are. 2%. Obviously, they could be posting from an asylum, couldn't they? You never know. 5,613 votes came in that. And I know that I had it up for 24 hours. I did that just to see what the feel was. My dream team would be Rupert back, Howard, Mayor of London. What a great future we'd have. It's not going to happen. But to say that they've thrown him under a bus, I think what Farage is trying, this is the other bit that's wrong, really. The leader, Farage, whoever he is, should be protected by the party so he can deliver all the good news. But it ended up Farage getting doorstepped by various journalists to talk about Rupert. And I'm sure it's not a position he wants to be in, but, Rupert's picked up the gauntlet pretty handily and defended himself remarkably well, obviously through his social media accounts and going on podcasts. But I cannot forgive him for going to, above all else, Tory boy. And, this is what I would have done, Howard, and I know we don't agree on this, but if I was Rupert Lowe with his credentials, his ability, his oratory perfection when he speaks, he's a man you want to listen to, I would have kept me gob shut, stayed in the party and got it somewhere near the finish line. And then I would have had a position for myself. Whatever's going on with reform, it is not that bad. It is not that bad because the people want it. Whether the people within
June, I actually agree with virtually.
I know. I think he wanted us not to agree.
I know, but the thing is, with Rupert,
no, I like this. We're tackling it. We're tackling it. It's good. I guess the one thing that I really viciously do disagree with June is that they didn't throw Rupert under the bus, because I think as soon as you report someone to the police, right, which is what Zia Yusuf did, for hurty words, then you've gone to a whole other level. Because that's where I think Rupert gets a lot of sympathy, because at the end of the day, they wanted to destroy him. They wanted to take away his liberty. They wanted to take away his freedom. I was reading Alistair Heath in the Daily Telegraph this week, and he makes the point that actually, he's very pro-reform and Farage and Zia Yusuf and Richard Tice, excuse me. But he makes the point, there has to be 20 more of them. Do you know what I mean? And 2 of those people, or 3 of those people, could have been Howard, Rupert Lowe, and Ben Habib. So where are these 20 people coming from? Where are these big names that can be the Home Secretary, etc.?
To be honest, I think you've fallen into the trap of what the mainstream media are doing. It doesn't matter at this stage. George Soros funds as much money into councils in America and different countries, into the lower echelon of government. A lot of his money goes into council elections to steer it from the bottom. And whilst all this online ruckus has been going on, you've got to allow some jurisdiction for the fact that Nigel Farage and a very small team of people have managed to set up 400 branches, over 1,500 volunteers, send off 3,000 freedom of information requests about council spending, and secure the running of 10 councils. if you think of government as a pyramid, he's nibbling at the foundations at the bottom, and that's a good thing. And he's been, I won't say distracted, focused is the right thing, whilst Ben and Rupert have focused on themselves, on getting their own arguments about why they should be in a better position than they are. They haven't had any of that work to do. They haven't assisted in any of that work. They haven't promoted any. In fact, Ben Habib, for me, was a terrible, you talk about being handed to the wolves. Ben Habib actually made a video to tell people not to vote for Sarah Pochine in that Labour stronghold, Runcorn. And so she was going to be up against it. And she got in with 4 votes. Then there was a recount. She got in with 6 votes. She's obviously proven herself to be very good. She's done more on immigration in the short time she's been in office than the previous Labour did in his whole entire tenure. So this business of trying to do reform arm is a massive mistake at this stage in the game. And thank God you couldn't unseat what's he called? Can't remember his name. Nigel Farage, as if Keir Starmer hasn't reminded me enough what he's called. It would be a huge mistake because nothing else is ready. It's like taking a cake out of the oven and it's still gooey. You're not ready, put it back in. And then when you've got something sorted out, you're all concentrating on the top men, the top end of government, who's going to be a cabinet, who's going to be a finance minister. I don't give a monkeys. I want to see more councils get control. How the hell are you going to run a country if you don't control the councils? And I wouldn't even put it past Keir Starmer coming up with something really, really awful. I'm talking war. I'm talking putting us on a war footing to avoid elections.
Oh, totally. We saw them do it this year, didn't we? We saw them do it this year. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.